They let me out. I got handed to those penitentiaries. They really know how to keep a man locked up. Welcome back to the Mid-Max channel. If you do not know what I was just talking about, I've been gone for a couple of weeks, if not a month, but that's fine. I haven't been locked away in any alternate universe or anything. And more importantly, if you clicked on this video, that means you are new to Dungeons & Dragons. And more importantly, new to this channel, so why not subscribe? That was awful. This is a bit of a crash course for new players who have interest in Dungeons & Dragons, but not necessarily the knowledge to back it up. That, or you are about 15 minutes late for your session and don't have a character yet, so you just kind of want to know, hey, how do I do this? So without further ado, and without wasting any more of your time, let's get right into things. This video is also, I should real quick mention, is for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you are running into a session that is 3.5, this information is probably not going to work for you, but some of it might. I will probably be making a 3.5 video at some point, although 5th edition is the one I'm more knowledgeable in currently. So, first things first, when you are going into a session, walking through those doors, one of the first things you're going to be expected to do is to have a character. And characters are composed of about 3 very major elements. These elements are the race, the class, and the background. There are of course other niche elements like the subclass and all these other fancy little things that you could put in your character, but we're not here to overwhelm you. You're new, let's figure it out. The race is probably the easier one to pick when you're making your character, because if you've watched Lord of the Rings, you know what a dwarf is. Short, stout, powerful, elf, elegant, graceful, archery, that sort of thing. So you might have an idea of what you want to play as already, but if you don't, here's a couple of examples. For example, dwarves are stout, which means they have a lot more health, they have strength, and they have poison resistance, and that one skill that nobody really knows why it's there, but it's kind of cool. Each race does give you a small bonus that you should consider when making your character, but if you're not into the whole, I want this bonus to go here and do this and do that, I want to make this crazy character build, and you're just new and you want to play a cool guy, just pick any race that comes to mind, any race that you feel like playing. And if you're not sure about your options, your Dungeon Master likely has a couple of books for you to look over, and if not, there are plenty of online resources, such as D&D Beyond or others, that can teach you and show you what the other races look like and what they do. It is worth noting, though, about character races is some Dungeon Masters opt to ban or just not use some races. So make sure, before you make your character and set in stone, that you say to your DM, like, hey, I want to play Turtle. And your Dungeon Master's like, no, that we are not doing a third Oogway. And if you're really indecisive about all this, you're really not sure what to pick, just pick a human. Humans are completely well-rounded. They get a bonus in literally every single thing. Stat-wise, of course. So you don't really have to worry about it that much. The class that you have to choose for your character is probably one of the most important parts of your character. And it's going to be certainly the most important decision you make for that character as well. Unfortunately, though, it is probably one of the hardest to decide to pick, especially as a new player, because you're not really sure what they do, there's so many of them. Ooh. So I have a very simple question for you. To pick your class right here and right now. What do you want to do? And what do you like doing? Do you like helping other people? Do you want to help your fellow adventurers in battle and otherwise? Maybe play a bard or a cleric. They excel in buffing and healing and just helping your team generally. Or do you want to be... In that case, play barbarian. Or do you want to be the armor-clad knight who's kind of charismatic and kind of a bit of a leadership type? In that case, play fighter or paladin. Either one works. One's a little more divine and has more of an oath going on. The other one's just a guy in armor. And if you're still not sure what to play, just go to your Dungeon Master and say, this is what I want to do. Is there a class or a subclass or something I could do to fulfill this role? I'm sure you and your Dungeon Master can work something out. Character background. Background, surprisingly, is just a little more than narrative storytelling. A background can actually dictate your proficiencies and some languages, and also some tool proficiencies if people still use those. And if you're not really sure what proficiency is, it's a small bonus that you get to your skills. For example, perhaps you're better at talking to someone with a +2 to anything you roll on your d20, instead of a +0 with no bonus. But we're talking about backgrounds. Like I mentioned, backgrounds can take care of proficiencies, languages, and a couple of other things, a couple of extra features. And some backgrounds exist pre-made, ready to go, like soldier, hermit, etc. But that might not fit your character. And you're probably thinking, out of this relatively actually short list of pre-made backgrounds, you don't see anything that fits your character. In that case, there are rules in the rulebook specifically to make your own background. Making your own background can just alleviate a lot of the, my character wouldn't really know how to do this, but they probably wouldn't know how to do this, but so this background doesn't really fit, but I got nothing else. It gets rid of the whole worrying about fitting in the features sort of deal. Moving on from backgrounds and the character generally, there is a very important aspect to Dungeons & Dragons. The sun's disappearing. Just ignore that for a second. Look at me. Dice are very important. They are not to be understated in Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, nothing happens without the dice. So you better know what they do. Let's begin with the ultimate, most important one, the d20. The d20 takes care of skill checks, attack rolls, saving throws. There's a lot more and I'm forgetting them. That's not good. The d20 is probably the dice you're going to be rolling the most. If you're not sure what d20 stands for, it is the dice 20, the 20-sided dice. Descending a little bit, we have the d12. The d12 is only used in very specific circumstances. For example, when you are making your character, often, you roll a dice to see how much health you have. A barbarian, and only barbarian specifically, uses a d12 to roll for their health. Another instance you might see a d12 show up in is when you are attacking another creature with a greatsword specifically. There are many other niche uses for a d12, but the uses it is in is often relatively important to your character specifically. Moving down again, we have the d10. The d10 is almost identical to the d12. It shows up in some characters' hit points, and how that is decided is in some spells and some weapon attacks, but you will probably see this one quite often too, especially if you are a spellcaster. Fireball and many other spells use d10s to roll for their damage. In case you didn't know, this is what a d10 looks like, and I realize I didn't put a graphic up for the d12, so here that is as well. Moving down again, the d8. The d8 is probably one of the most common dice used to roll for damage. This is what it looks like. And you will be using this a lot if you use martial weapons. What martial weapons are usually just bigger weapons like a long sword or a big mace.
Hi, Future Mid-Mask here. The mace doesn't actually do 1d8 damage, it actually does 1d6 damage. I was actually consequently thinking of a warhammer doing a d8 damage.
I'm not sure if there's two different types of maces. There are many weapons in this game, but many of them use the d8. So expect to have that one on your table quite a bit. The majority of classes also use the d8 to roll for their health. Moving down once more, we have the d6. The d6 is another very common dice used for damage. That's it. I'm gonna kind of speed through these last ones here because there's not much else to say about them. D6, by the way, you've probably seen this before if you played Monopoly and consequently took all the property from your family afterwards. Finally, we have the d4, the smallest dice. It looks a bit like a pyramid and is often used for small damage calculations. It is not ever really used for health calculation, thank God. D4 is often used for some spells such as Bless, which allows you to give a small bonus that you get to roll for to your teammates on some saving throws. And now that you have familiarized yourself with how to generally make a character and what the dice do, we're going to jump into combat rules. Combat is a very large part of Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, many of the classes that you will be playing with your character just have abilities purely for combat. And this is where the majority of the content for Dungeons & Dragons is. So let's start with how combat flows generally. Everyone will get their turn, but their turn is dictated by, you guessed it, the d20. Everyone rolls their d20 or their initiative roll, and whoever has the highest goes first, and whoever has the lowest goes last. It is worth mentioning that your dexterity score, your ability score, dictates the little bonus that you get to initiative. Say you have 12 in your dexterity. That means you'll get a +1 to your initiative. Once you have rolled for initiative and it is your turn, you get to do 2 things on your turn, primarily. There are other small things, but we're not going to get into that right now. The main thing you can do on your turn is referred to as an action. Very dramatic. An action is usually things like hitting someone with a sword, casting a spell, or many other bigger actions, like deciding you really want to run really fast over there, or you want to hide maybe from the creature that is chasing you. There are many different things you can use your action for, some not actually dictated too much in the rules and may be left up to your DM. But just know that if you attack or do anything that would take a lot of effort is probably an action. The other thing you can do on your turn is a bonus action, not to be confused with the action. A bonus action is not just an extra action, but is more like an offhand thing you can do. Some spells can be cast using a bonus action, and there are some attacks you can do as a bonus action. But really think of it as something that you're doing quickly with your offhand, the hand that you don't use a lot. Good example of a bonus action is rogues get the ability to dodge and hide as a bonus action instead of an action, meaning that they can attack and then dodge instead of only being able to dodge or attack. The last thing, you as a character have movement. Very, very revolutionary knowledge here, I know, but you have a set amount of movement. If you notice that while making your character, that 30 feet is how much you can move in a single turn during combat. Every square of the grid is usually 5 feet, but this means typically you can move up to 6 squares, or 6 units on the grid if you are just using a different type of grid. Movement is important because it allows you to close the distance between you and the creature you need to attack, or perhaps quite the opposite, where you want to make a gap. And the last important thing that you'll need to know, just starting out, is a reaction. A reaction is not something you do during your turn, although you could under some circumstances. A reaction is a small action you can take in response to something else happening on someone else's turn. For example, if a creature exits your melee range while it's not your turn, you can actually attack them as a reaction. Only once though. There are many abilities and other things that you get during Dungeons & Dragons that you can use as a reaction, but reactions are not used as often as actions and bonus actions and movement, so that's why I left them for last. But if you ever do see something listed as a reaction, you can fly away, then just know you can do that as a reaction or a response to something else on another turn. I know this video was all over the place. I'm getting back into the swing of things, but regardless, I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope you found enjoyment out of it. I hope it was at least somewhat humorous. And if it was not any of those things, I've got to go back to the penitentiary. But that is all from me for today. Again, hope you enjoyed, hope you found it useful. Adios.